What happens when a promise of a new life becomes a death sentence? A young woman, Sophia May Thompson, travels 2,000 miles across a hostile country, answering an ad for a mail-order bride. She's not searching for a grand romance, but for a sliver of hope, a patch of earth to call her own. But when she arrives at a desolate ranch in the Montana Territory, she doesn't find her waiting groom. She finds a man bleeding out in his own bed, his life hanging by a thread. With a storm brewing outside and predators circling within the valley, she has a choice: flee back to the life she despises, or stay and fight for a stranger who might not live to see the dawn. This is the story of how a single act of defiance saved a man's life and forged a bond so powerful he would tear the world apart before ever letting her go. The journey had scoured Sophia May Thompson down to her bones. For 6 weeks, the relentless clatter of the train had been her only constant companion, a rhythmic beat marking the passage of miles and the shedding of her old life. Boston, with its damp sea air, its rigid society, and the whispered scandal that had finally driven her away, felt like a dream from another lifetime. She had exchanged its cobblestones for an endless expanse of prairie that bled into the jagged, tooth-like peaks of the distant mountains. Her destination was Redemption Gulch, Montana Territory. The name itself felt like a desperate prayer. Her correspondence had been with a man named Elias Thorne. His letters were brief, almost brutally so. They spoke of land, 300 acres of it, a small herd of cattle, and the need for a wife. There were no flowery words, no promises of affection, just the stark, practical offer of a partnership. He would provide a home and security. She would provide companionship and help build a life. For Sophia, a 24-year-old former governess whose reputation had been unfairly tarnished by the vindictive lies of her previous employer, it was the only lifeline she had. The train hissed to a stop at a station that was little more than a wooden platform and a shack. The sign, its paint peeled by sun and wind, confirmed her arrival: Redemption Gulch. Pop. 142. The air was thin and sharp, smelling of pine and dust. It was a lonely, desolate smell. A lanky man with a drooping mustache, the station master, heaved her trunk onto the platform with a thud. "You, the mail order for Thorne?" he asked, not unkindly. Sophia clutched her worn reticule. "I am. Is Mr. Thorne here to meet me?" The man, whose name was Jedediah, squinted at the empty, dusty track that served as the town's main street. "Was supposed to be. Elias ain't one to be late. Not his style." He scratched his jaw. "Tell you what, my boy's heading out that way with a supply wagon. He can take you and your trunk. Thorne's ranch is the last stop on the North Creek Road. Can't miss it." A knot of anxiety tightened in Sophia's stomach. It was a poor start. Still, she had not come this far to be deterred by a simple missed appointment. She thanked Jedediah, and an hour later found herself perched precariously on the seat of a buckboard wagon, rattling along a road that was more suggestion than reality. The Thorne Ranch was nestled in a shallow valley, bisected by a creek that glittered in the afternoon sun. The house was a simple, sturdy-looking cabin of hewn logs with a wide porch and a stone chimney. Smoke curled lazily from it, a hopeful sign. But as the wagon drew closer, the initial impression of rustic peace began to fray. A fence rail was broken and lying in the dirt. The water trough for the horses was bone dry. The front door was slightly ajar, swinging gently in the breeze. "This is it, ma'am," the boy said, pulling the horses to a halt. He looked as unnerved as she felt. "You want I should wait?" "No, thank you," Sophia said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm sure everything is fine." She paid the boy and watched him turn the wagon around, his departure stirring a cloud of dust that seemed to swallow him whole. Now she was truly alone. The silence was immense, broken only by the wind whistling through the pines and the creak of the unlatched door. "Mr. Thorne," she called out, her voice thin in the vast emptiness. "Elias." "It is Sophia Thompson." There was no answer. Taking a deep breath, she walked up the 3 steps to the porch. She pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The interior of the cabin was dark and smelled of stale whiskey and something else, something metallic and unsettling. A fire smoldered in the hearth, casting long, dancing shadows. The main room was sparsely furnished but clean, with a table, 2 chairs, and shelves holding a few books. But it was the doorway to a smaller room at the back that held her attention. A low, guttural groan emanated from within. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She forced her feet to move her practical nursemaid instincts, overriding her fear. "Mr. Thorne." She pushed the bedroom door open. The metallic smell was stronger here, thick and cloying. On a simple rope bed lay a man tangled in a sweat-soaked quilt. He was large-framed, with a shock of dark, unruly hair plastered to his forehead. A thick beard matted with sweat, and something darker covered his jaw. His eyes were closed, his face pale beneath his tan, and his breathing was a ragged, shallow whisper. Sophia rushed to his side. The quilt was stained a deep, rusty brown around his abdomen. Hesitantly, she pulled it back. A crude bandage, little more than a torn strip of shirting, was wrapped around his middle. It was completely saturated with blood. Fresh blood, bright and crimson, seeped from beneath its edges. This was no illness. "Mr. Thorne," she said louder this time, shaking his shoulder gently. "Elias, can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered. For a moment, his eyes, a startlingly clear, deep blue, focused on her. They were clouded with pain and confusion. "Water." He rasped, his voice a dry crackle. She found a bucket and a dipper by the door. The water was nearly gone, but she managed to fill the dipper and bring it to his lips. He drank greedily, some of it spilling down his chin. "Who?" he whispered. "It's Sophia Thompson. Your bride." The word felt absurd under the circumstances. A flicker of something disbelief or perhaps despair crossed his face before his eyes rolled back and he lapsed into unconsciousness. Sophia stood frozen for a moment, the sheer, overwhelming reality of her situation crashing down on her. The man she had traveled across a continent to marry was dying. He wasn't sick. He was wounded grievously so. She was alone, miles from a town she didn't know, with a man who was a complete stranger. The sensible thing to do was to run. To take what little money she had left, walk back to town, and beg Jedediah to put her on the first train heading east. She could go back to Boston, swallow her pride, and accept a life of servitude and scorn. She looked down at Elias Thorne. In his unconscious state, the hard lines of his face had softened. He looked vulnerable, stripped of the rugged strength his letters had implied. She saw the calluses on his hands, the faint scar above his eyebrow, the powerful set of his shoulders. This was a man who worked, who fought, who lived in this harsh land, and someone had tried to end him. Then she looked at her own hands. They were soft, accustomed to holding books and guiding a child's pen, but they were steady. Her mind trained to be orderly and methodical began to work. Panic was a luxury. Action was a necessity. She had not come all this way to be defeated before she had even begun. She had sought a new life, a chance to build something. Perhaps this was it, in its most raw and terrifying form. Her new life began not with a wedding vow, but with a vigil. "All right, Mr. Thorne," she whispered to the still figure on the bed. "It seems our partnership is beginning a little sooner than planned. You just hold on. You are not dying today." With a resolve that surprised even herself, Sophia May Thompson turned from the bed, rolled up her sleeves and set to work, saving her husband-to-be. She would need hot water, clean cloth, and every ounce of courage she possessed. The wedding could wait. The resurrection had to begin now. Sophia's first priority was to assess the damage. With grim determination, she located a lantern, lit it against the gathering dusk, and returned to the bedside. Taking a steadying breath, she carefully began to unwrap the blood-soaked makeshift bandage. The cloth clung to the wound, and she had to moisten it with the last of the clean water to peel it away without tearing the skin further. What she saw underneath made her stomach churn. It was not a clean wound like one from a bullet or a knife. It was a jagged, ugly gash along his side, deep and bruised at the edges, as if he'd been struck with something heavy and sharp, like the broken end of a spade or the horn of a saddle. It was inflamed and hot to the touch, the first sign of a festering infection. The bleeding, though slower now, had not stopped. Her governess training had included basic first aid poultices for fevers, setting a simple break cleaning scrapes. But this was far beyond her experience. Yet desperation was a powerful teacher. She remembered her grandmother, a woman with a deep knowledge of folk remedies, using sphagnum moss from the bogs to pack wounds during the war between the states. It was known to be highly absorbent and had antiseptic properties. Leaving Elias for a moment, she searched the cabin. It was a man's space, utilitarian and bare. But on a small shelf alongside tins of coffee and beans, she found a small collection of dried herbs. She recognized chamomile yarrow, good for staunching blood flow, and willow bark, a natural pain reliever and fever reducer. It was a small mercy, but a significant one. Elias, or someone he knew, had a basic understanding of nature's pharmacy. Her immediate task was to clean the wound. She built up the fire, setting a large kettle of water to boil. While it heated, she tore strips from one of the clean linen shirts she'd packed in her trunk. The fine fabric intended for her new life as a respectable wife was now being repurposed as medical dressing. Forcing herself to be methodical, she gently but thoroughly cleaned the gash with the boiled, cooled water and a sliver of lye soap. Elias groaned and thrashed his body, fighting her even in his delirium. "Hush now. It's all right," she murmured, her voice a soothing balm in the tense silence of the cabin. "You must be still. I'm trying to help you." His fever was climbing. His skin was slick with sweat, and his incoherent muttering grew more frantic. He spoke of cattle of fences, and one name repeated over and over again like a curse: Blackwood. Blackwood. The creek. Damn you, Blackwood. The name meant nothing to Sophia, but she filed it away. This was not a random accident. This was a conflict. Once the wound was as clean as she could make it, she ground the dried yarrow into a fine powder and packed it carefully into the gash. It was a grisly task, but she worked with a focused intensity. She then applied a thick poultice of crushed willow bark, mixed with a little flour and water, to a strip of linen and laid it over the top, binding it all firmly with more cloth strips. The night was a blur of fear and labor. She brewed a strong, bitter tea from the remaining willow bark and forced trickles of it between his cracked lips whenever he stirred. She bathed his forehead with cool cloths, willing the fever to break. She sat in a hard-backed chair, the lantern casting her shadow long and distorted on the wall, and listened to the man's ragged breathing, praying each breath would not be his last. Sometime before dawn, the fever broke. One moment he was burning to the touch, the next a wave of perspiration covered his body, and his breathing deepened, becoming more regular. He fell into a true healing sleep. Sophia allowed herself to slump in the chair, her body screaming with exhaustion, and wept silent tears of relief. The next 2 days were a grueling routine. She found the well and a nearby spring, ensuring a steady supply of fresh water. She explored the small barn, finding a single placid milk cow who was grateful to be relieved of her burden. The fresh milk boiled and cooled became her own sustenance. She foraged near the creek, her childhood lessons in botany paying off as she identified wild onions and edible greens, and she tended to Elias. She changed his dressing twice a day, relieved to see the inflammation lessening and the edges of the wound beginning to knit together. The angry red was receding, replaced by a healthier pink. She kept him hydrated with water and weak chamomile tea. On the 3rd day, he woke. Sophia was sitting by the bed, mending one of his torn shirts, when his eyes opened. This time, they were clear. He looked at her, his gaze sharp and intelligent. He took in her unfamiliar face, the neat stitches she was making, the clean bandage on his side, and the quiet order she had brought to his chaotic cabin. "You're the woman from the train," he said, his voice weak but steady. "Sophia Thompson," she supplied softly. "Yes." He tried to sit up, a sharp intake of breath signaling his mistake. He fell back against the pillows, his face tight with pain. "Easy now," she cautioned, setting aside her sewing. "You've been very unwell. You have a terrible wound in your side." He looked down at the bandage. "I remember falling. My horse spooked." He said it like a question, as if trying to convince himself. "The wound doesn't look like it came from a fall, Mr. Thorne," Sophia said carefully, watching his face. "And you spoke a name in your fever." "Blackwood." A storm cloud passed over his features. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by a hard, guarded mask. "Silas Blackwood is a neighboring rancher. We have disagreements over water rights. Nothing more." The denial was so swift, so absolute, that it confirmed her suspicions. He was hiding something either from pride or fear. She decided not to press the issue. He was too weak to be agitated. "Be that as it may," she said, changing the subject, "you need to regain your strength. I found some oats. I can make you a gruel." For the next week, a strange, unspoken truce existed between them. Sophia nursed him with quiet efficiency, and he accepted her care with a gruff, reluctant gratitude. He was a difficult patient, proud and impatient with his own weakness. But he was also observant. He watched her as she moved about the cabin, her hands always busy. He saw the intelligence in her eyes, the resilience in the set of her jaw. This was not the timid, helpless woman he might have expected to answer his advertisement. One afternoon, as she was helping him sit up to eat, their hands brushed. A jolt, unexpected and potent, passed between them. Sophia pulled her hand back as if burned, a faint blush rising on her cheeks. Elias's gaze lingered on her, a new light dawning in his deep blue eyes. He was seeing her not just as a nurse, but as a woman. "Why did you stay?" he asked, his voice low. Sophia smoothed her apron, avoiding his gaze. It was the practical thing to do. "You were in no condition to be left alone. Another woman would have run," he stated, not as a criticism, but as a fact. "Walked back to town and taken the first train out." "I am not another woman, Mr. Thorne," she replied, meeting his eyes at last. "And I did not come 2,000 miles to run at the first sign of trouble." A slow, wry smile touched his lips for the first time. It transformed his face, erasing some of the hardness. "No," he said, a note of wonder in his voice. "I see that you didn't." That evening, the trouble she'd spoken of arrived. 2 men on horseback rode into the yard. They were rough-looking, with pistols strapped to their hips. Sophia watched them from the window, her hand flying to her throat. "It's Blackwood's men," Elias growled from the bed. He tried to rise, but fell back with a curse. "Don't go out there, Sophia." But the men were already dismounting, striding towards the cabin. One of them, a burly man with a cruel smirk, hammered on the door. "Thorne, we know you're in there." "Blackwood wants a word about that fence you put up by the creek." Sophia's heart pounded, but her face was a mask of calm. She opened the door just enough to block the entrance with her body. "Mr. Thorne is indisposed," she said, her Boston accent crisp and clear. The man sneered. "And who in the hell are you?" "I am Mrs. Thorne." She lied the words, tasting strange on her tongue. "And I am telling you that my husband is not to be disturbed. State your business, and I will relay it to him when he is well." The man laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Mrs. Thorne, is it?" Didn't know Elias had it in him. "Look, lady, this ain't your concern. We need to talk to him." He made to push past her. From the bedroom, Elias's voice roared, full of surprising strength. "You lay one hand on her, and I'll kill you, Dooley. I swear to God I'll crawl from this bed and kill you where you stand." The man named Dooley froze. He looked from Sophia's defiant face to the dark doorway, then back again. He licked his lips, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He wasn't afraid of a sick man, but he was clearly familiar with the threat of a healthy Elias Thorne. "This ain't over." He spat on the ground, and then with a final glare at Sophia, he and the other man mounted their horses and galloped away. Sophia closed the door, her knees suddenly weak. She leaned against it, her body trembling. Elias had called her by her name. He had defended her. He had called her her. She went back into the bedroom. He had pushed himself up and was leaning against the headboard, his face pale with the effort, but his eyes were blazing with a fierce, protective fire she had never seen before. "He didn't touch you?" he demanded. "No," she whispered. "I'm all right." He stared at her, his chest rising and falling heavily. He looked at her, standing there in her simple dress, her face pale, but her chin held high. The woman who had saved his life, and then stood down his enemies. In that moment, something shifted between them, something profound and permanent. The arrangement of convenience, the practical partnership they had agreed to on paper, was consumed by the fire of the last week. "Sophia," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Come here." She moved hesitantly to the side of the bed. He reached out, and this time she did not pull away, as his large, calloused hand gently took hers. His grip was surprisingly strong. "You saved my life," he said, his gaze locking with hers. "You faced down my enemies. You have more courage in your little finger than most men have in their whole bodies." He paused, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "I made you a promise of a home and security. That promise has changed. I swear to you on my life, the life you gave back to me, I will never let anyone harm you. I will never let anything take you away. I will never let you go." It was not a dissociation of love. It was something deeper, more primal. It was a vow forged in blood and fever, in fear and defiance. And as Sophia looked into the fiery depths of his blue eyes, she knew that this man, Elias Thorne, would sooner see the world burn than break the promise he had just made. Her new life had truly begun, and it was bound to his with an intensity that both thrilled and terrified her. In the weeks that followed Elias's vow, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted from a patient and nurse dynamic to a tense and intricate partnership. Elias healed with the stubborn resilience of a man intimately familiar with hardship. First he was sitting up in bed, then he was shuffling around the cabin using a sturdy pine branch as a crutch. Finally he was walking under his own power, his gait stiff, but his resolve like iron. With his physical strength returning, so too did his authority over his domain. He was a man of few words, but his presence filled the small cabin. He watched Sophia with a hawk-like intensity that she found both unsettling and strangely comforting. His vow had not been an empty promise. It was a living, breathing thing that manifested in 100 small ways. He insisted on chopping the wood, even when it clearly pained him. He took the rifle with him every time he checked the perimeter of the ranch. He would stop what he was doing, and his eyes would scan the horizon if a horse nickered unexpectedly. He was guarding her. And in his gaze, Sophia saw a mixture of gratitude, duty, and something else, a burgeoning possessiveness that was as fierce as it was new. Their conversations were mostly practical, revolving around the ranch. The cattle needed to be rounded up from their summer pastures. The hay needed to be cut and stored for the winter. The finances, as Sophia discovered when Elias finally showed her his ledger, were precarious. The attack had happened at the worst possible time, right before he was meant to sell off a dozen head of cattle to pay for winter supplies. "Blackwood knew," Elias said one evening, his fist clenching on the table. "He knew that if he took me out of the picture for a few weeks, I'd be ruined. He wants this land. More specifically, he wants the North Creek. It's the only water source in this valley that doesn't run dry by late August." "Can't the sheriff do anything?" Sophia asked, though she already suspected the answer. Elias let out a short, bitter laugh. "Sheriff Brody. He's owned by Blackwood lock, stock, and barrel. Blackwood holds the mortgage on his saloon and pays him a handsome consulting fee to look the other way. The law in Redemption Gulch is whatever Silas Blackwood says it is." The bleak reality of their isolation settled upon them. They were an island, and the water was rising. Blackwood's harassment became more brazen. One morning, they woke to find the creek running at a trickle. Elias rode out, his face a thunderous mask, and found that Blackwood's men had built a crude dam upstream, diverting the majority of the water onto Blackwood's own property. Elias spent the entire day, his body aching, tearing it down with an axe. He returned after dark, exhausted and mud-splattered, but victorious. 2 days later, a small portion of their herd was found spooked, scattered across the rocky hillsides. It took them the better part of a week to find and round them up, during which 3 calves were lost to coyotes. It was a deliberate, calculated act of economic warfare. During this time, Elias began to teach Sophia. "If you're to be my wife," he'd said, the term still sounding slightly foreign on his lips, "you need to be a rancher's wife. This ain't Boston." He taught her how to properly saddle a horse, how to sit a saddle for a long ride without tiring, and how to read the sky for signs of changing weather. His teaching style was like his letters, direct, practical, and devoid of frills. He was a patient but demanding instructor, and Sophia, with her quick mind and determination, proved to be an able student. The most significant lesson came one afternoon by the barn. He retrieved his rifle from the cabin and a small lighter pistol from his saddlebags. "You need to know how to use these," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Sophia recoiled slightly. "I've never held a firearm in my life, Mr. Thorne." "It's Elias," he corrected her firmly. "And that's going to change today. I can't be everywhere at once. If Dooley and his friends come back when I'm not here, you need to be able to defend yourself. Defend our home." He started with the rifle, showing her how to load it, how to brace it against her shoulder, how to sight down the barrel. The weapon was heavy and awkward in her hands. Her first shot went wide, the recoil slamming the stock into her shoulder and making her yelp. A flicker of frustration crossed her face. "I can't do this." Elias stepped behind her. "Yes, you can." He was close, so close, she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He adjusted her stance, his hands on her waist, then moved his large hand over hers on the rifle stock. "Don't fight it," he murmured, his voice low and close to her ear. "Become part of it. Squeeze the trigger, don't pull it. Gently. Like this." His body shielded hers from the recoil as he helped her fire again. This time, the bullet struck the tin can he'd set on a fence post 50 yards away, sending it spinning into the air. A thrill of accomplishment shot through her. They spent the next hour practicing first with the rifle, then with the lighter, more manageable pistol. As she grew more confident, she began to understand. This wasn't about violence. It was about survival. It was about leveling the playing field in a world where a woman alone was considered prey. The forced intimacy of the lessons changed the air between them. The physical space that had separated them, her in her corner, him in his, was shrinking. They worked side by side during the day, ate their simple meals together in the evening, and sat in comfortable silence by the fire at night. Sophia found herself watching him, admiring the quiet competence with which he moved, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he was deep in thought. He in turn found himself depending on her in ways he never expected. It was Sophia who realized they could stretch their flour supply by supplementing it with ground acorns. It was Sophia who devised a system of rotating the cattle through the pastures to make the most of the thinning grass. She was not just a helper. She was a partner, his equal in mind and spirit, if not in physical strength. The true test of their evolving relationship came during a violent thunderstorm that rolled in one night without warning. The sky erupted in a fury of lightning and thunder, and rain lashed against the cabin in solid sheets. In the midst of the gale, they heard the panicked bellowing of cattle. "They're spooked," Elias yelled over the roar of the storm. "The fence by the south ridge must have gone down." He was already pulling on his boots and slicker. Sophia's heart leaped into her throat. For him to go out in this storm in his still recovering state was madness. "You can't go alone," she cried. "Let them go, it's not worth it. That herd is our winter." He shot back, his face grim in the lamplight. "If I lose them, we lose everything." Without a second thought, she pulled on her own coat and boots. "Then I'm coming with you." "No, it's too dangerous. You'll stay here, where it's safe. His vow was a cage locking her in. "You need me, Elias," she argued, her voice rising with passion. "You can't round them up alone in this mess. Your side isn't fully healed. What if you fall? What if the wound reopens? Who will be there for you? You said we were partners. It's time you started acting like it." He stared at her, caught between his instinct to protect her and the undeniable logic of her words. He saw not a fragile woman from the city, but a warrior, her eyes flashing with a fire that matched the lightning outside. He gave a sharp nod. "All right, but you stay close. You do exactly as I say." They rode out into the tempest. The world was a chaotic nightmare of driving rain, blinding lightning, and the terrified cries of the herd. Working together, they became a single unit. He with his knowledge of the land and the animals, and she with her steady nerve rode the perimeter, turning the panicked cattle back from the broken fence line. A lightning strike sent a massive pine crashing to the earth just yards from Sophia, and her horse reared in terror. Before she could fall, Elias was there, grabbing her reins. His presence a solid anchor in the storm. They returned hours later, soaked, freezing, and utterly exhausted, but they had not lost a single animal. They stumbled into the cabin, stripping off their wet clothes in a shared, desperate need for warmth. Elias built the fire up into a roaring blaze while Sophia made coffee. They sat on the hearth rug, wrapped in dry blankets, shivering. The storm outside was finally passing. "You were right," Elias said quietly, staring into the flames. "I couldn't have done that alone." He looked at her, his eyes full of a raw, unguarded emotion she had never seen before. "I keep trying to put you in a safe box, Sophia. But your place isn't in a box. It's out here beside me." He reached out his fingers, gently tracing the line of her jaw. "I've never known anyone like you." The space between them crackled with an energy more potent than the lightning. The pretense was gone. This was not about a contract or a duty. This was about two people forged into one by shared hardship and mutual respect. Sophia leaned into his touch, her heart aching with a feeling so new and powerful it stole her breath. He leaned in, and his lips met hers. It was not a gentle, tentative kiss. It was a kiss of desperation and discovery of gratitude and a deep, possessive hunger. It was the kiss of a man who had almost lost everything and had just found the one thing he could not bear to lose. It was the sealing of his vow not in words, but in fire. And in that moment, Sophia May Thompson knew she was no longer just a mail-order bride. She was home. The kiss by the fire was a threshold. Once crossed, the landscape of their lives, both inside the cabin and out, was irrevocably altered. The air between them, once filled with the formal cadence of a business arrangement, now hummed with a different kind of tension, one of unspoken questions and burgeoning tenderness. Elias no longer looked at her merely with gratitude or protective duty. His gaze now held a possessive heat, a deep and searching curiosity, as if he were trying to memorize the very essence of the woman who had upended his solitary world. For Sophia, the solid ground of her practicality had given way to something far more treacherous and exhilarating. The heart she had so carefully guarded, the heart that had sought security over affection, was now terrifyingly, wondrously exposed. They moved through the following days in a state of heightened awareness. A simple brush of hands while passing in the narrow cabin doorway became a significant event. A shared look across the dinner table could stretch into a silent, intense conversation. They had not spoken of the kiss, nor had they repeated it. It lay between them a single perfect ember that neither dared to breathe on too heavily, lest they either extinguish it or set their entire world ablaze. The external threat, however, did not grant them the luxury of exploring this new fragile territory. Silas Blackwood's war of attrition continued. A new, more substantial dam appeared on the North Creek, forcing Elias to spend 2 back-breaking days dismantling it. The night after he finished, a fire broke out in their northern pasture, consuming a 1/4 acre of precious winter grazing before they, working frantically together with wet sacks, could beat it into submission. It had been deliberately set. That night, exhaustion and rage radiated from Elias in palpable waves. He paced the cabin floor like a cowed wolf, his still healing side a dull, throbbing ache. "This has to end." "Sophia," he said, his voice a low growl. "We can't keep plugging holes in a sinking ship. He's bleeding us dry a little at a time. He knows we don't have the resources to withstand a long siege." Sophia, who had been darning one of his work shirts by the fire, set her sewing aside. "Then we must stop reacting and start acting. We have to think, Elias. What are our options?" "Options." He let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "We could sell. Tuck our tails and run. Let him have the land he's willing to kill for. Is that what you want?" His question was a challenge, and she met it head on. "No. I didn't run from Boston to run from Montana. I am done with running." "What else?" He stopped pacing and looked at her, the firelight catching the grim determination on his face. "I could go after him. The old way. A rifle and a reckoning in the dark. It would be my word against his corpses." The cold finality in his tone sent a chill down Sophia's spine, but she did not flinch. "And you would hang for it. Sheriff Brody would see to that personally. Blackwood's death would be blamed on you regardless of the truth. He would win, even from the grave, and we would lose everything. No, Elias. We must beat him with the law, not with a bullet." "The law?" Elias scoffed, gesturing dismissively. "The law in this town is a fat, bribed man with a tin star and a mortgage held by our enemy. The town's law, yes." Sophia conceded, her mind working furiously. "But not the territory's law. There are circuit judges, are there? Not men appointed by the governor who travel from town to town, who answer to a higher authority than a local cattle baron." "Judge Morrison." Elias nodded slowly, the idea taking root. "He's a hard man, but fair. He comes through Redemption Gulch in the spring and the fall. He's due in less than a month." He paused, the hope in his eyes dimming. "But it would still be my word against Blackwood's. A respected rancher with deep pockets against a man he nearly killed. Who do you think Morrison would believe, especially with Brody whispering in his ear?" This was the crux of it. They needed more than an accusation. They needed proof. Concrete, undeniable proof. "We need a weapon. Blackwood can't counter." Sophia said, her voice dropping to an intense whisper. "We need a witness." Elias fell silent, his gaze turning inward. He sank into the chair opposite her, the memory of the attack washing over him. "The day he came for me," he began, his voice strained. "I wasn't alone. One of my hands. Billy Page was with me. A good boy, barely out of his teens. Strong back, a little green, but he learned fast. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor as if the scene were playing out there. We were resetting a fence post by the creek. The air was cool. I remember the smell of the damp earth. Blackwood and Dooley rode up their horses, trampling the new wire. Blackwood was smiling that cold smile of his. He started talking about the water, how I was a thief. I told him to get off my land. He just kept smiling. He dismounted, and I saw him kick loose a heavy oak fence post we hadn't set yet. Dooley pulled his pistol on Billy. Just held it on him casual as you please. Told him not to move a muscle. I saw Billy's face. He was terrified. Frozen. I started to turn to put myself between him and Blackwood, and that's when he swung the post. It felt like being kicked by a mule. The sky just vanished. He looked up at Sophia, his blue eyes haunted. He left me for dead. And Billy saw it all. "Where is he, Elias?" Sophia asked, her heart aching for the man in front of her and the terrified boy he described. Elias's jaw hardened into a line of granite. He ran. Jedediah told me Billy cleared out his pay from my lockbox the next day and was gone. Said the boy was too spooked to stay. Or he was paid to be spooked, Sophia countered, rising from her chair and moving to stand behind his. She placed her hands on his tense shoulders. Blackwood wouldn't leave a witness. He would have threatened him, paid him or both. He forced him to run. And a man who runs that hard doesn't want to be found. Then we must be more determined to find him than he is to hide, she insisted. He is our only hope. Their new course set. They rode into Redemption Gulch 2 days later. The town felt different now. Sophia saw it not as a quaint frontier outpost, but as enemy territory. She saw the way the shopkeepers' eyes flickered away when they met their gaze, the way conversations stopped when they entered the general store. The air was thick with a fear that was as tangible as the dust on the street. They went first to the station, but Jedediah, who had once been friendly, was now a wall of anxious denial. Billy Page, haven't seen him since the day after. Well, since that day. Don't know where he went, don't want to know. Best to let sleeping dogs lie, Thorn. As they turned to leave, the saloon doors swung open and Sheriff Brody stepped out, blocking their path. He was a large, portly man, his face flushed with whiskey and self-importance. His eyes, small and porcine, raked over Sophia with a leering familiarity that made her skin crawl. Well, well. Thorn! And the little missus, he drawled, hooking his thumbs in his gun belt. Heard you two have been having some trouble out at your place. Fire's damn trouble. A real string of bad luck. It's not luck, Brody, and you know it. Elias said, his voice dangerously level. We're looking for Billy Page. Thought you might know something. Brody chuckled, a low rumbling sound. The Page boy. He lit out. Can't blame him. This is hard country. Not for boys. Or for city women, for that matter. He gave Sophia another long, insolent look. Maybe you should convince your husband to sell to Mr. Blackwood. He's made a fair offer. It'd be a lot safer for everyone. The threat was unmistakable. Sophia felt Elias tense beside her, his hand inching toward the rifle on his saddle. Before he could react, Sophia stepped forward, her gaze cool and direct. Thank you for your concern, Sheriff, she said, her crisp Boston accent a stark contrast to his frontier drawl. But my husband and I are not for sale, and we are not easily frightened. Now if you'll excuse us. She took Elias's arm, her grip firm and steered him past the glowering sheriff. They walked their horses down the street in silence, the weight of the town's corruption settling heavily upon them. As they passed the mercantile, Sophia noticed the storekeeper's wife, Martha Gable, watching them from the shadows of the doorway, her expression a mixture of fear and pity. An idea sparked in Sophia's mind. "Wait here," she murmured to Elias, and handing him her reins, she walked toward the store. She entered with a purposeful air, picking up a small sack of flour and a tin of coffee before approaching the counter where Martha stood. "Good day, Mrs. Gable." Sophia began, her tone friendly and casual. Martha just nodded, refusing to meet her eyes, her hands nervously pleating the fabric of her apron. "I was hoping you could help me," Sophia continued, leaning slightly closer. "I'm a good friend of Billy Page's mother back east. I promised her I would look out for him. With the boy having moved on, I'd so love to write to her and let her know where he's settled, just to ease her mind. A mother worries so." The lie was carefully constructed, aimed directly at a mother's heart. Martha's gaze flickered up her own maternal instincts, warring with the fear that held the town in its grip. She glanced toward the front window where the hulking figure of Sheriff Brody was still visible, talking with one of Blackwood's men. "I can't," Martha whispered, her voice trembling. "It's not my place. I'd lose the store. My husband, I understand completely," Sophia said, her voice softening with genuine sympathy. "I would never ask you to put your family at risk." She paused, placing her hand gently on the older woman's. "It's just that Billy was sweet on your daughter, wasn't he? A good boy, like that one with affections. He wouldn't just vanish without a word, not unless he was in terrible trouble, or terribly afraid." At the mention of her daughter, a tear welled in Martha's eye. The fear for her own was now mingled with fear for the boy her daughter cared for. That was the key. Martha's resolve crumbled. She leaned across the counter, her whisper barely a breath of sound. "He has a cousin, a distant one. Name of Silas, too, ironically. Works a small silver claim. Up in the Garnet Range. There's a camp. They call it Bear's Jaw." She pulled back, her face pale. "That's all I know." "I never told you. My girl. She'd be heartbroken if she knew I'd put him in more danger." "He's in danger now, Mrs. Gable," Sophia said softly. "This is his only way out. Your secret and your courage are safe with us." She paid for her goods and left her heart pounding with a mixture of triumph and dread. The Garnet Range was a 2-day ride north through remote, dangerous territory known for bandits and bears. But it was a destination. It was a path. Their preparations for the journey were somber. It was a mission from which they might not return. The night before they left, as they sat by the fire, Elias finally reached across the space between them and took her hand. "Sophia, I can't ask you to do this," he said, his voice rough. "This is my fight. It stopped being just your fight the moment I found you in that bed," she replied, her fingers lacing with his. "It became our fight the moment you stood up for me. It became our life the moment you—" She trailed off, unable to say the word, "kissed." He understood. He brought her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss into her palm, a gesture of such profound tenderness, it made her ache. When this is over, he vowed, we'll do it right. A proper wedding, a real life. No more running, no more fighting. Just peace, Bartle. The journey to the Garnet Range tested their resolve at every turn. On the second day, a cold rain began to fall, turning the narrow mountain trail into a sick, treacherous path. As they rounded a sharp bend, Elias's horse lost its footing, its legs scrambling on the wet rock. With a cry of alarm, the horse went down, throwing Elias hard against the stony ground. Sophia was off her horse in an instant, her heart in her throat, the memory of his first injury horribly vivid. He lay on the ground, groaning, his hand pressed to his wounded side. Elias. "I'm all right," he gritted out, pushing himself up slowly. "Just the wind knocked out of me. The wound, it pulled." He was pale and breathing heavily, but nothing was broken. The horse, thankfully, was also uninjured, just spooked. But the incident shook them both. It was a stark reminder of how close to the edge they were living. Working together, they calmed the horse and redistributed the packs. Sophia insisted on checking his bandage, her touch gentle and professional, yet filled with a deep personal fear. As she worked, he watched her, his expression raw. "You see," he said quietly, "I need you. I'm just a stubborn fool without you." That night, they made a cold camp under a rocky overhang, the rain drumming a ceaseless rhythm above them. Huddled together for warmth under a single blanket, the last of their pretenses fell away. "I was a governess for the Cabot family, in Boston," Sophia said into the darkness, her voice soft. "Their youngest son, a boy of 19, fancied himself in love with me. When I rebuffed his clumsy, aggressive advances, he lied to his mother. He told her I had been improper, that I had encouraged him. Mrs. Cabot, a woman for whom reputation was everything, dismissed me without a reference. The scandal followed me. No one would hire me. I was ruined." Elias held her tighter. "So you came west. I came looking for a place where a person is judged by their character, not by the whispers of the spiteful," she said. I think I've found it." I was 16 when the fever took my parents. Elias responded, sharing a piece of himself he had never offered to anyone. I was left with this land, a broken-down cabin, and 6 head of cattle. For 15 years, all I did was work. I never thought about companionship, never thought I deserved it. It was easier to be alone. He paused. "It's not easier anymore." They rode into Bear's Jaw the next afternoon. The mining camp was a chaotic, muddy mess of humanity, a testament to greed and desperation. After hours of careful questions, they found the claim. And they found Billy Page. He was a ghost of the boy Elias had described, gaunt and hollow-eyed, his movements jerky with paranoia. When he saw them, he dropped his pickaxe and scrambled backward like a cornered animal. "Stay away," he shrieked. "I don't know you, Billy. It's me, Elias Thorne," Elias said, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "We're not here to harm you. Blackwood will kill me." He said he would. Billy was sobbing now, cowering against a rock face. "He gave me $200, a fortune." He said if I ever breathed a word, his reach was long. He'd find me. Sophia dismounted and approached him slowly as one would a frightened colt. She knelt in the mud before him. Her own fine traveling clothes be damned. "Billy, my name is Sophia. I am Elias's wife. We know you're afraid. You have every right to be. But the life you're living now, this isn't living. It's a prison of fear, and Blackwood is your jailer." She reached into her satchel and pulled out her little book of Shakespeare. "There is a line I've always held on to. she said, her voice clear and resonant, cutting through his panicked sobs. Cowards die many times before their deaths. The valiant never taste of death but once. She looked him square in the eye, her gaze compelling. Silas Blackwood is making you die 1,000 tiny deaths every day. You hide every time you look over your shoulder. We are offering you the chance to taste of it, just once. To be valiant for one single day. To stand up in a courtroom and speak the truth. He'll kill me, Billy repeated, shaking his head frantically. And what if he does? Elias said, his voice hard but not unkind, as he came to stand behind Sophia. Is it better to die on your feet as a man, or live on your knees as a ghost? You testify, Billy. You tell Judge Morrison what you saw. And you will have my gun and her mind to protect you. We swear it. After it's done, you won't have to hide. I'll give you a job back at the ranch. A real job. A home. A chance to start again, not as a coward who ran, but as the man who brought Silas Blackwood to justice. The offer hung in the air. It was more than protection. It was a path to redemption. Billy looked from Sophia's compassionate, intelligent face to Elias's rugged, honorable one. He saw in them not just a desire for revenge, but a fierce, unyielding demand for justice. He saw the home they were fighting for, the life they were building. He saw the very things he had lost. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself up from the mud. The trembling in his hands subsided. A flicker of the boy he once was, the boy who was sweet on Martha Gable's daughter, returned to his eyes. He took a deep, shuddering breath. All right, he said, his voice cracking with emotion and newfound resolve. All right, Mrs. Thorne. Mr. Thorne. I'll do it. I'll testify. Their alliance was forged. 3 desperate people against a tyrant. As they rode away from Bear's Jaw, with their witness shielded between them, Sophia knew the storm they had been bracing for was no longer on the horizon. They were riding directly into its heart, and the path to reckoning had begun. The story of Elias and Sophia is a powerful reminder that love doesn't always arrive in a pretty package. Sometimes it's forged in the fires of adversity, built on a foundation of courage and unwavering loyalty. Theirs is a testament to the fact that a true partnership isn't about one person saving the other, but about 2 people standing together to save each other over and over again. It's a story about finding a home, not in a place, but in a person, and fighting for that home with everything you have. If their journey from strangers to soulmates touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who appreciates a story of resilience and true grit. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell so you won't miss our next tale from the annals of history. Thank you for listening.